HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Convivial Codfish by Charlotte Macleod, read by Susan Boyce. Chapter 1. Exalted Chowderhead Jem Kelling, of the Beacon Hill Kellings, gazed benignly around the luncheon table at his 18 comrades of the Convivial Codfish. Wineglass raised, he proposed the ancient and time-honored toast. "Here's to us!" "And to hell with the rest of 'em!" roared the comrades in one great voice. "Down the hatch, comrades!" "Bottoms up!" shouted 17 of them. "A dead whale or a stove boat!" yelped Comrade Wouter Tolbathy. Nobody paid any attention. They were used to Wouter. The glasses were drained. The Exalted Chowderhead dabbed at his lips with a black-bordered napkin to which a spray of holly had been affixed, minus its berries and upside down. "I hereby declare our annual Scrooge Day to be in session. 'Tis the season to be snarly. Whither art thou, Marley's ghost?" "Present and clanking, Exalted." Hung with safe deposit boxes, piggy banks, petty cash vouchers, a streetcar conductor's nickel-plated coin sorter, and fragments of an old cash register. Formerly Exalted Comrade Tom Tolbathy rattled smartly to attention. "Canst thou produce the detested object?" "I canst, Exalted. At least I think I canst." Considerably impeded by his plethora of piggy banks, Marley's ghost reached under the table and tugged forth the chosen artifact. "God, is there no bottom limit to the depravity of human imagination?" murmured Comrade Billingsgate. Last year's affront to his aesthetic sensibilities had been a styrofoam elf with sequined eyeballs that lit up and twinkled. This year, it was an inflatable plastic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer standing 4 feet high from hooves to antlers, wearing a red and green chicken feather tutu. Even the Exalted Chowderhead winced, but went manfully on with the ceremony. "Ghost of Christmas past, what sayest thou?" Comrade Billingsgate lumbered to his feet. "Bah humbug," he growled. "Bah humbug," the comrades howled back. "Ghost of Christmas present? May we have your report?" Comrade Ogham settled his wreath of wilted mistletoe more dashingly over his left ear, gave the assemblage a good look at his teeth clear back to the bicuspids, and replied sweetly, "Bah humbug, comrades. I hope you've followed your Exalted Chowderhead's sterling example and been bad little boys this year." "Bah humbug," they replied, all but Jem Kelling. He maintained a dignified silence until the dust had quit falling from the finely molded old plaster ceiling. "Ghost of Christmas to come? Pray speak." Formerly Grand Exalted Chowderhead Rip groped for the edge of the table. Thus supported, he managed to hoist himself halfway out of his chair. "Bah humbug," he quavered. This was Obed Ogham's idea of fun, Jem Kelling thought sourly. He'd been the one to insist on Rip for the role. Dash it, the comrades didn't need to be reminded what sort of shape they themselves might be in a few Christmases hence. Nor was it even decent, let alone amusing, to use poor old Rip as a pawn in a tasteless joke. Jem Kelling himself was a relative infant among the comrades of the Convivial Codfish, being still on the sunny side of 70. He'd had to wait until the belated demise of his own great-uncle Serapis, the only other bon vivant in the Kelling clan, before he could even be considered for membership, which was strictly limited and generally went by inheritance. Then he'd had to work his way up through the ranks. For years, he'd been dreaming of the time when he, little Jem, would get to wear the great chain. with its perch-sized sterling silver codfish pendant, and sit at the head of the table. Only this past November, when the comrades gave formal thanks to be rid of their previous Exalted Chowderhead, and announced themselves ready to take on an evil they wotted not yet of, had he been raised to august rank. This was his first whack at chairing a meeting, and if that bastard Ogham thought he could crab Jem's act, he could think again, by gad. Avoiding the ghost of Christmas presents, no doubt sardonic leer, Jem swept a gallant bow in the oldest member's direction. "Thank you, formerly Grand Exalted, and a hearty bah humbug to you. Comrades, a triple rejoinder for the ghost of Christmas yet to come." They gave it with a will. Perhaps some felt this might be the last bah humbug their once puissant leader would ever receive. It was a poignant moment. Even Obed Ogham seemed to feel some small pricking of remorse for his ill-judged prank. At any rate, he appeared to humbug with due reverence and sobriety. But sobriety was not the object of this gathering, and Jeremy Kelling would have been the last Scrooge to pretend it was. "Bob Cratchit," he ordered, "get to work, or I'll fine you thruppence and take away your coal hod." "Aye, verily, Exalted." Bob Cratchit, known to his underlings as Mr. Ashbroom, to his wife as Edward, and to a lady in an apartment on Joy Street as Cuddles, cringed around the table refilling the wine-glasses in a properly servile manner. "And now, Tiny Tim, may we have the malediction?" Comrade Durward, who had taken off his spectacles so that he wouldn't be able to see the detested object, put them on again and peered around the table in search of his wine-glass. He located it at last 2 points southeast of his plate and succeeded after a few tries in making safe hand contact with the stem. At last he rose to speak his one immortal line. "Bah humbug, everyone." Bob Cratchit sniffled. "Fair tugs at the heartstrings, don't he?" "Bah humbug, you old humbug," snarled Obed Ogham. "As for you, brat, one more word out of you and I'll splinter your crutch. Comrades, do you suppose Scrooge is ever going to give us anything to eat?" Not by word, glance, or so much as a flaring nostril did Jeremy Kelling indicate that he found the plastic reindeer only the second most detested object present. He merely got on with the agenda. "Marley's ghost, prithee conjure up a suitable receptacle. Forthwith, Exalted." Tom Tolbathy, at least, could be relied on not to pad his part. Managing his chains as deftly as his grandmother had done her bustle, he clanked away to the corner of the meeting-room and returned with a tinsel-bedecked garbage can. Jeremy Kelling gave him a nod of thanks, then raised the detested object high above his head. "Comrades of the Convivial Codfish, let us keep Christmas in our own fashion." "Thar she blows," said Wouter Tolbathy. It was a surprisingly relevant remark for Wouter. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer proved too big for the suitable receptacle. Marley's ghost solved the dilemma by whipping a jackknife out from among his impedimenta and sticking Rudolph in the rump, to tumultuous applause. The Exalted Chowderhead, then, crammed the deflated wad of repulsion into the garbage can, flung the feathered tutu in after it, and dusted his hands. "Whoop, whoop, halloo! I am as merry as a schoolboy. Cratchit, the bottle. Mrs. Cratchit, the chowder." It would have been unthinkable for the comrades of the Convivial Codfish to order anything but genuine Boston fish chowder, made without any superfluous abominations, and that was what they got. The waitress who brought it, however, albeit an acceptable Mrs. Cratchit in every other respect, had been so misguided as to adorn her bodice with a superfluous abomination in the shape of a whimsical Christmas corsage. Comrade Dork voiced the general outrage. "Exalted Chowderhead, I move Mrs. Cratchit be requested to park that bedizenment in the suitable receptacle, as constituting an affront to the curmudgeonly spirit of Scrooge Day, and to the disgruntlement for which we so proudly stand." "Second the motion," growled the ghost of Christmas past. "Any objections or abstentions?" asked Jeremy Kelling. Comrade Durward raised his hand. "I can't see what the fuss is all about." "Can you see Mrs. Cratchit?" Actually, no." He took off his spectacles, wiped the enormously thick lenses with his napkin, put them on again, and peered earnestly into the face next to him. "Oh, hello, Wouter. I thought you were Tom." "I am," said Marley's ghost. "Wouter's over there." "Oh." Comrade Durward took off his spectacles again and subsided. Jeremy Kelling ruled him out of order, and appointed himself to unpin it, feigning not to hear the lewd asides from Obed-Ogum. Mollified by his assurance that she'd be allowed to retrieve her corsage afterward, Mrs. Cratchit served the chowder. Excellent chowder it was, and lustily did the comrades bail it in. Even their exalted Chowderhead forgot the cares of office and concentrated on getting his full share while maintaining a properly Scrooge-like demeanor. It wasn't until he had laid down his spoon and untied his black-bordered napkin from beneath his nethermost jowl that Jem Kelling noticed a horrible vacancy over his waistcoat. He was no longer wearing the great chain. "The codfish!" he gasped. "It's gone!" "It fell into the receptacle, you jackass," retorted Comrade Twitchett, who had not spoken at all until now, except for an occasional humbug. "I didn't hear it clink." "Naturally not. You're deaf as a haddock and drunk as a skunk." This intellectual repartee was right up the comrades' alley. They varied and embellished the theme while Jem bellowed for Marley's ghost to go get the goddamn receptacle and bring it back. That done, he personally removed the corsage, the deflated Rudolph, and the feather tutu, shook them out to no avail, and at last stuck his head inside the receptacle, to the accompaniment of coarse ribaldries. "The codfish isn't there," he groaned. "Then it's under the table, where you usually wind up, you old souse," replied the ghost of Christmas Present. It was not. It wasn't anywhere. Those cumbrous silver links, that piscatorial pendant that had so short a time ago rested in splendor atop Jeremy Kelling's neat little paunch, had vanished like the chowders of yesteryear. "You've taken it off and forgotten to put it back on," said Bob Cratchit, forgetting to cringe. "Softening of the brain, that's all. Nothing to worry about. I'll serve the port, shall I?" All hailed the suggestion except the exalted Chowderhead. While the decanter went around and the comrades waxed, despite their worst intentions, merry, Jeremy Kelling brooded. Where in hell had the damn thing got to? It couldn't have fallen off. Those massive, overlapping links had been clinched together for eons to come by an old-time artisan who'd known whereof he clinched. There was no clasp to come unfastened. The only way to remove the chain would have been to lift it over his head. And that had not happened. So experienced a toper as J. Lemuel Alexander Kelling could hardly have got drunk enough on a paltry 4 glasses of Chardonnay Sauvignon not to notice a trick like that. Furthermore, where could it have got to? A damn great thing that weighed about 5 pounds and had 6 inches of codfish attached to it was no mere bauble you could stuff out of sight in your hip pocket. None of the comrades had been out of his sight since he'd donned the great chain, except when one of them had required to be excused for non-ceremonial reasons. He himself hadn't left the room once. They didn't call him Old Iron Pants for nothing, by gad. As Bob Cratchit continued his appointed rounds, speculation about the great chain's disappearance grew more imaginative. Everybody accused everybody else of codnapping. Comrades took to visiting the men's room in squads to make sure nobody was trying to sneak the codfish off in his codpiece. Mrs. Cratchit was exonerated, firstly because it would have been ungallant to accuse her, secondly because she was found on inquiry to be somebody's mother, and thirdly because she'd had her hands full ever since she'd entered the room, initially with the chowder tureen and latterly with Obed Ogham. She was allowed to gather her corsage and depart in peace. At last, a thorough search of the room was conducted, with all the comrades crawling around the floor on hands and knees, making what they fancied to be reindeer noises, except for Wouter Tollbathy, who chose to be a wyvern, and probably was. Most of them appeared to regard the great chain's disappearance as a jolly jape, and to be confident it would turn up at the next meeting in some arcane guise. Jeremy Kelling was not so sanguine. His first act on returning to his Beacon Hill apartment was to fight off the ministrations of his faithful henchman Egbert, who took it for granted Mr. Jem must be sick, because he'd come home from the luncheon sober and perturbed instead of sloshed and jolly. His second was to put in an emergency call to his recently acquired nephew-in-law, Max Bittersohn. Chapter 2. "Max," howled Jem, "I've lost the codfish." Even though he'd taken a long leap away from his own family tree, Max retained many of its traditional values. Among the Bittersohns, grown men didn't go around losing codfish. Grown men worked, albeit they were entitled to be merry in their labor. Grown men improved their minds with serious study, and their souls with deeds of noble self-sacrifice. Grown men looked after their wives and their kids, if they had any, which Max didn't as yet, and had certain responsibilities to the Gans Mishpacha, even when their family connections had grown to include uncles-in-law like Jeremy Kelling. Though he still hadn't figured out why some of his new wife's relatives were allowed to run loose, Max remembered his duty and delivered what he thought might possibly be a suitable reply. "I knew a man who lost a stuffed muskellunge once." He'd flubbed it again. Jem was irate. "Dash it, man! Cease your persiflage. The great chain of the Comrades of the Convivial Codfish is a sacred relic, like the grasshopper on the Faneuil Hall weather vane, or George Washington's teeth," he added to emphasize the gravity of the situation. "It disappeared some time after I'd put the detested object into the suitable receptacle." "That would be as reasonable a time as any, no doubt," Max answered. "You don't suppose it fell into the receptacle?" "How the hell could it? The blasted chain was around my neck. There was no way it could have got there unless I fell in too, which I can assure you I did not. Damn it, I'm not drunk. Egbert can testify to that." Now it was getting ridiculous. "Put him on," said Max. Egbert, to their mutual amazement, was able to vouch for his employer's unprecedented sobriety. "It's very worrisome, Mr. Max. I've never seen him this way before, except sometimes on the morning after," he qualified, for Egbert was a truthful man when circumstances did not require him to be otherwise. "I think he might accurately be described as shaken to the core." "Good God! He can't be that bad." "Who can't?" Max's wife, Sarah, had just come into the room. "Your Uncle Jem. Egbert says he's shaken to the core. Put Jem back on, Egbert. Come here, Angela Mia." By holding the receiver a little way out from his ear and Sarah as close as possible to his chest, Max was able to include her in the conversation. There'd been too damned many years when he had no Sarah to hold, and he was not about to miss an opportunity. Theoretically, of course, he now had every chance in the world. In fact, his crazy profession kept him away from her far too often. Despite the necessary sacrifices, though, Max loved his work as a tracker down of vanished valuables. The disappearance of any sacred relic, even a codfish, acted on him as a mayfly on a trout, and any codfish that could reduce Jem Kelling to a state of palpitating sobriety gave him a glorious excuse to satisfy his sense of family duty and indulge his second favorite occupation at one swoop. Sarah was interested, too. By calling on Max's expertise and forcing her uncle to talk sense for once in his life, she managed to obtain for her husband a complete and perhaps even reasonably accurate account of the bizarre occurrence. Jem was all set to tell it again, but Max wasn't about to listen. "Okay, Jem, you've told me that. How much is the chain worth?" "Worth? What do you mean, worth?" "It's priceless, damn it, as a historic relic." "Relic of 1,000 binges," snapped his niece. "Quit sputtering and tell Max what it's made of." "Solid silver, of course." Goaded by Sarah, Jem managed a description of sorts. "I can show you photographs if they'd help," he finished after he'd dragged them floundering through a sea of incoherencies and profane interjections. "Why in hell didn't you say so?" growled Max, rubbing his hand up and down Sarah's spine and thinking of all the things he'd rather be doing than standing here listening to an old rip blether on about a missing codfish. "Okay, Jem. I'll drop over sometime soon and take a look." "How soon? Dash it, Max! This is urgent business." "Could we pinpoint the urgent? When's your next meeting? April Fool's Day?" "Curse you!" roared Jem. "Is nothing sacred to your disgusting generation? We meet on Valentine's Day, February 14th. I have to skewer a pink satin heart on the end of a cavalry saber at full gallop and deposit it in the suitable receptacle. And for your information, whippersnapper, the Comrades do not celebrate the date to which you sneeringly alluded. Our April meeting's on the 27th, Ulysses S. Grant's birthday." "I'm not surprised," Sarah answered. "Do simmer down, Uncle Jem. Max will think of something. He always does." "Guess what I'm thinking right now," Max murmured into her soft hair. "Sorry to disappoint you, darling," she told him, "but Cousin Brooks will be here in about 2 minutes to put up the curtain rods." Max had forgotten about the curtain rods. Understandably, perhaps. He hated all those fiddling around the house jobs Sarah's first husband had been so good at. Alexander would have had them up by now. Damn it, was he never going to quit being jealous of a dead man? "Why didn't you remind me?" he growled. "I told you I'd do them." "So you did, last week, and the week before. Cousin Brooks is going to do them this afternoon. That's the difference between you and him. One of the less important differences." She reached up to tug at his hair. Max had wonderful hair, thick and wavy, and so dark a brown it might almost have been black. Sarah's own was just plain brown, though it did provide an agreeable frame for her squarish, rather pale, altogether delightful face. Her eyes were greenish hazel. His were either blue or gray. She'd never been able to decide which. Among the multi-remorse Kelling clan, it was generally conceded that Sarah and her new husband didn't make a bad-looking couple. Of course, this Bittersohn fellow, whoever he might be, was far less handsome than the late Alexander Kelling, but so was everybody else. At least Max wasn't 24 years older than Sarah. He did make pots of money with that detective agency of his, and it was art, not divorces. All things considered, almost everyone except Cousin Mabel was willing to agree Sarah might have done worse for herself. They'd been married last June in the backyard at Ireson's Landing. Sarah's cousin Dolph had given the bride away because he'd have raised hell if she hadn't let him. Max's nephew Mike had been best man for the same excellent reason. Jed Lomax, the caretaker, and his crippled wife had been honored guests. Cousin Theonia had baked the wedding cake. Max's sister Miriam had made the knishes. Sarah's boarding-house confederates, Mariposa and Charles, had stage-managed the affair. Nobody had got killed, or drunk beyond reasonable limits, or stung by a bee. Nobody had fought with anybody. Some people might have thought it dull, but Max and Sarah hadn't. They'd been honeymooning ever since, by fits and starts, as Max's work allowed, camping out in the little apartment over the carriage house between trips until winter's advent drove them back to town. At the old Kelling brownstone on Beacon Hill, they'd had literally no place to lay their heads. Sarah'd done too good a job at filling it with boarders, and hadn't had the heart to put anyone out. Max was glad. It would have galled him to share her with a house full of other people and her memories of her first marriage. He was far happier paying a preposterous monthly rent for a small apartment that had providentially fallen vacant in the house next door, and dropping over for meals with Brooks, Theonia, and the paying guests once or twice a week. They still weren't settled in. Sarah was running her legs off, shopping for furniture, and trying to cope for the first time with the double demands of Christmas and Hanukkah, not to mention her own adjustments to a second set of in-laws. Max had a new client clamoring for a stolen Van Dyke and much unfinished business on his hands. Neither of them had leisure to worry about Jem Kelling's silver codfish, and neither gave it more than a passing thought until Egbert turned up on their brand-new doormat the following evening. Sarah let him in. "Egbert, what a nice surprise. What's happening now?"
"It's Mr. Jem, Miss Sarah. He's fallen down the front hall stairway."
Sarah stared at him.
"You don't mean the inside stairs? Egbert, he couldn't have. Uncle Jem loathes going over those stairs. The elevator got stuck on the top floor, Mrs. Sarah."
That was possible, she knew. Jeremy and Egbert lived in a block of flats that had been carved out of an old townhouse. There was an elevator, dating from 1905 or thereabout, roughly the size of a phone booth. It wouldn't work unless both the inner and the outer door had been properly shut and latched by whoever had used it last. When that happened, one either used the stairs or made a fuss. Jem's usual procedure was to send Egbert after the elevator, or else bellow up the shaft until some other tenant was goaded into going out and fixing the doors. In desperate situations, however, such as when Egbert wasn't around, nobody answered his calls, and he'd run out of gin. Jem had been known to stomp angrily down the one flight of stairs from his second-floor apartment. This, evidently, had been one of those times. Now, Mr. Jem was over at Philip's house with a brand-new stainless steel ball where the joint of his left femur used to be. Egbert thought Mrs. Sarah and Mr. Max would want to know.
"Yes, of course," Sarah told him. "Egbert, this is ghastly. Bad enough for Uncle Jem, of course, but think of those poor nurses who'll have to put up with him. Have you any idea how it happened? Did you get to talk to him?"
"I got to listen, Mrs. Sarah. How it started was, he'd sent me out to do some Christmas shopping for him. Well, you know what the stores are like this time of year, so I was gone most of the afternoon. I got back to the house about 5 o'clock, dead beat, and what should I find when I opened the front door but Mr. Jem, sprawled on the vestibule floor, yelling his head off. As soon as I realized he wasn't able to stand up, I ran upstairs to call the ambulance and get him a tot of brandy. That dulled the pain and calmed him down enough so he could tell me what he was doing there. He said, 'Fuzzlies,
had phoned about 5:15 and told him his whiskers were ready, but he'd have to hurry because they were closing in 15 minutes. So he'd gone charging down the stairs like a damned old water buffalo. I beg your pardon, Mrs. Sarah, but don't apologize, Egbert. Naturally.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?